Lake Powell has plunged to 3,522 feet, dropping nearly 40 feet in a single year. Did you know this reservoir controls one of the most critical water systems in North America? Comment where you are watching from, because what is unfolding here threatens power and water for 40 million people. Just 32 feet now separate functioning turbines from a dead pool crisis, and the clock is already running. White mineral scars ring the canyons above the waterline, a stark reminder of just how much has vanished. Today, Lake Powell measures between 3,522 and 3,535 feet above sea level, leaving the reservoir more than 160 feet below its full pool mark. What used to be vast stretches of blue now expose sun-bleached cliffs and stranded boat ramps. At this elevation, the lake holds only 24 to 26% of its original live storage. That means nearly 3/4 of the water that once filled these canyons is gone. Daily elevation data confirm the loss. Each foot lower erases another slice of usable water, shrinking the reservoir's buffer against drought. Capacity tables from the Bureau of Reclamation show that for every 10 feet the lake drops, millions of gallons disappear from the system. Water that cannot be replaced by a single storm or a good snow year. The numbers are more than statistics. They turn Lake Powell's scenery into a running tally of a crisis. If you want to see more deep dives into the hidden infrastructure and environmental systems that shape our world, like this video and subscribe now. The numbers on the shoreline are only the beginning. The real story is how quickly the margin for error is vanishing. Every year, the math behind Lake Powell's decline grows more unforgiving. The reservoir is losing between 30 and 40 feet of elevation each year, a drop that translates to millions of gallons vanishing month after month. The reason lies in the water balance. Inflows from the Colorado River and its tributaries are consistently outpaced by the combined demands of downstream releases and relentless evaporation. In a typical year, about 500,000 acre-feet of water disappears into the dry desert air, sucked up by the lake's broad, exposed surface. Meanwhile, scheduled releases through Glen Canyon Dam routinely exceed what flows in, leaving a net deficit of nearly 1 million acre-feet each year. That shortfall acts like a slow-motion siphon, steadily draining the system. Even a year of above-average snowpack cannot offset these losses, because the deficit is baked into the current climate and management rules. As the surface area shrinks, evaporation drops slightly, but not enough to halt the downward spiral. The result is a feedback loop. Lower levels mean less water to lose, but also less buffer before the next critical threshold. If you want more data-driven documentaries that break down the world's biggest infrastructure and resource challenges, subscribe now. The simple arithmetic of inflow versus outflow is pushing Lake Powell closer to its operational limits, and the pace is only accelerating. At 3,490 feet, Lake Powell reaches what engineers call the minimum power pool. This is not just another milepost on the way down. It is the hard floor where Glen Canyon Dam's turbines must shut down. The Bureau of Reclamation, which operates the dam, enforces this limit because the water pressure, or head, drops so low that the turbines can no longer safely spin. If the reservoir slips below this line, nearly 1,300 megawatts of clean hydropower vanish from the Southwest's grid within days. That is enough electricity to supply hundreds of thousands of homes across Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and beyond. The dead pool sits even lower, near 3,370 feet. At that point, the dam loses the ability to release water downstream through its normal outlets. Only emergency bypasses remain, and the Colorado River's flow past Glen Canyon becomes a matter of contingency planning, not routine management. As of now, the margin above minimum power pool is just 32 feet, barely a year's worth of decline at the current rate. The latest projections suggest this buffer could disappear in as little as 9 to 12 months. Each foot lost brings the system closer to a full shutdown of hydropower and a crisis in water delivery. The difference between 3,522 feet and 3,490 feet is not just a number on a chart. It is the final operational knife edge for one of the West's most critical pieces of infrastructure. 40 million people depend on water that passes through Lake Powell. That number includes the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix, the bright lights of Las Vegas, and the fields of California's Imperial Valley. Every time a faucet runs in Los Angeles or a crop is irrigated in Yuma, the source can be traced back to the Colorado River's shrinking reserves. The stakes are not just urban. 5 million acres of farmland rely on these deliveries, producing everything from lettuce and melons in the winters to alfalfa and cotton in the summer. Cities have invested billions in pipelines, treatment plants, and storage systems, all built on the promise that river flows would be reliable. Farmers have shaped entire economies around the expectation of steady irrigation. But as Lake Powell's buffer shrinks, so does the margin for meeting these needs. Water managers in Arizona, Nevada, and California now face the prospect of mandatory cutbacks, tiered pricing, and emergency conservation. The numbers are personal. Every drop lost at Powell is a drop that cannot reach a home, a school, or a field downstream. The rules that govern the Colorado River were written in a time of abundance, when river gauges measured some of the wettest decades in centuries. The 1922 Compact and the Law of the River divided water based on flows that, paleoclimate records reveal, were nearly 30% higher than the long-term average. Tree ring studies and sediment cores now confirm that the 20th century's wet spell was an outlier, not a baseline. Yet, every allocation, every legal promise is still pegged to that wet mirage. The system was built to deliver more water than the river can reliably provide, especially as the basin swings to the dry end of its natural variability. The result is a structural mismatch. Even in years with decent snowpack, the math doesn't add up. The gap between supply and demand isn't just a product of recent drought. It has been embedded in the system from the start. As climate models point to a future with even less runoff, the legal framework itself becomes a character in the crisis, locking water managers into choices that no longer fit the reality on the ground. The next chapter will turn to how this mismatch complicates the delicate balancing act between Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are joined by a 277-mile corridor of river and canyon, forming the backbone of the Southwest's water supply. The two reservoirs aren't just neighbors, they are codependent. When Powell drops, managers must decide how much water to hold back at Glen Canyon Dam to protect hydropower and how much to send downstream to keep Lake Mead from tipping into its own shortage crisis. In 2026, the legal rules that dictate this balancing act are set to expire, and every basin state is at the negotiating table, including Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. The Department of the Interior is driving talks that will decide whether to lock in new shortage formulas, adjust allocations, or overhaul how the system responds to drought. The latest draft environmental impact statement outlines options for joint operation, including a 3,525-foot holdback at Powell to buy time above the minimum power pool. With the negotiation calendar ticking toward an October 2026 deadline, the urgency is clear. The next set of rules will determine whether the system can adapt or spiral into conflict. The choices made now will set the stage for the scenarios that follow, where every foot of elevation lost carries consequences for power, water, and the future of the Colorado River. The countdown has begun. Under the current rate of decline, 30 to 40 feet lost each year, Lake Powell's minimum power pool, the line where Glen Canyon Dam's turbines must go dark, sits just 13 to 18 months away. That is the best case window if conditions hold steady. Model projections from the Colorado River simulation system show that, without major changes, the reservoir could hit dead pool in as little as 3.8 years. At that point, not only does hydropower vanish, but the dam loses its ability to release water downstream through its normal outlets. Policy options can buy time, but not much. The most aggressive operational adjustments, cutting releases, ramping up conservation, and shifting more water banking upstream might stretch the power pool deadline by another 18 months. But even with these measures, the margin is razor thin. A single dry year or a spike in evaporation could erase any gains. The numbers are unforgiving. Every scenario attaches a clock to the choices facing water managers. The region is not just running out of water, it is running out of time before the system's engineered safety nets give way. Next, the story turns to the economic costs that follow when those safety nets fail. The economic fallout of Lake Powell's decline reaches far beyond the waterline. Local businesses that once thrived on lake tourism now face a staggering blow. If the reservoir drops to minimum power pool, annual recreation losses are projected at $1.3 billion. That is money erased from hotels, marinas, restaurants, and outfitters, jobs and livelihoods that depend on visitors drawn to the water. But the price tag does not end with lost tourism. When Glen Canyon Dam's turbines go silent, utilities across the Southwest must scramble to replace up to 1,300 megawatts of clean hydro power. The cost of buying substitute electricity from gas-fired peaker plants can run into the hundreds of millions of dollars each year, a burden that lands squarely on ratepayers. And with every megawatt shifted from hydro to fossil fuels, the region's carbon footprint grows. Analysts estimate that replacing lost hydropower could add more than 4 million metric tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere annually, undercutting climate goals just as the Southwest faces record heat. These numbers turn the crisis into a daily reality for business owners and families alike. As the countdown on Lake Powell continues, the true cost is not measured only in feet lost, but in dollars, emissions, and the economic future of an entire region. Do you think the Colorado River system can bounce back? Or is the Southwest headed for a permanent era of scarcity? Let us know in the comments below. Today, Lake Powell hovers just above crisis level, holding less than a quarter of its full storage. As inflows weaken and releases outpace recovery, the Southwest faces a stark reality. There is no hidden reserve. Is the Colorado River system headed for permanent scarcity? Share your view in the comments below.